He grabbed the wrong girl. Now, the most dangerous man in Korea is coming for his soul. The story begins at the elite Chunghae Academy. The sterile hallways are suddenly pierced by the sound of breaking glass. Park Sung-ho, a desperate gambler in a dark hoodie, moves aggressively toward the girl he thinks is his ticket out of debt. But the man standing next to her isn't a teacher. It's Choi Woo-jin, a man who governs the shadows so his daughter can live in the light. Stay with me till the end, because the way the Korean mafia boss saved his secret daughter from the kidnapper will leave you speechless. We continue. Please like, comment, and subscribe to get more interesting stories. In the velvet darkness of the back row, Choi Woo-jin was less a man and more a shadow woven into the architecture of the Chunghae Academy auditorium. While the powerful elite of Seoul preened in the front rows, flashing diamond-encrusted watches and rehearsed smiles, the head of the nation's largest crime syndicate sat in silence. His presence was a secret kept from the world, and most importantly, from the girl on stage. Kang Soo-min stood under the spotlight, a delicate figure in her pressed school uniform, her fingers dancing across the keys of a grand piano. To her classmates, she was the brilliant scholarship student with no family to cheer for her. She didn't know that the anonymous benefactor who paid for her world-class education was currently watching her with a gaze that could freeze the Han River. Woo-jin's hand, scarred from a decade of ascending the bloody ranks of the underworld, rested steady on the armrest. He lived a double life with surgical precision. By day, he was the devil of Seoul, a man who governed the shadows so the sun could rise. By night, he was a ghost, haunted by the only weakness he allowed himself to possess. He believed that distance was the only true armor he could give her. If the world knew she was his daughter, she would become a target. If she knew he was her father, she would see the monster that the evening news warned her about. The music swelled, a complex piece that required a strength her small frame seemed too fragile to carry. Woo-jin felt a rare, sharp ache in his chest, the suppressed humanity he spent 30 years trying to kill. He was the apex predator of a concrete jungle, a man whose word was law in the back alleys of Gangnam, yet here, he was merely a spectator in a life he wasn't allowed to touch. As the final note echoed through the hall, Woo-jin stood before the lights came up. He slipped through the rear exit, his $10,000 black suit disappearing into the rain-slicked night. He didn't need the applause. He had seen her safe, and for a man like him, that was the only ritual that mattered. He signaled to the black SUV idling at the curb, his expression returning to its habitual mask of cold, calculated stone. The ghost was returning to his throne, unaware that in just a few moments, the sanctuary he built for her would be shattered by a desperate man making the last mistake of his life. The transition from the auditorium to the gala's grand foyer was supposed to be a seamless shift in his masquerade, but the air in the Chunghae Academy hallway had grown heavy with a sudden, unnatural stillness. Woo-jin stood near the rear exit, adjusting his cufflink, the image of a refined, wealthy investor. Across the corridor, Soo-min was adjusting her backpack, her face still flushed with the success of her performance. Then the world broke. A deafening crack reverberated through the hall as the rear glass door exploded inward in a spray of jagged diamonds. Park Sung-ho lunged from the shadows of the rain-slicked parking lot, his hooded form a jagged silhouette against the dim light. He moved with the desperate, clumsy aggression of a man who had nothing left to lose, his hand reaching for Soo-min's shoulder with terrifying intent. In that heartbeat, the investor died. Woo-jin didn't shout, he didn't panic. Instead, his entire aura underwent a tectonic shift, shedding the skin of a businessman to reveal the apex predator beneath. With a speed that defied his heavy black suit, he closed the distance. He pulled Soo-min behind him with one iron-tight arm, his body becoming an impenetrable shield between the girl and the threat. The girl gasped, her eyes wide and luminous with shock as she leaned into him, her small hands clutching his sleeve for a safety she didn't fully understand. Sung-ho froze, his reckless momentum halted by the sheer weight of Woo-jin's gaze. It wasn't the look of a frightened father. It was the tense, furious stare of a man who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of retribution. The sterile hallway, once a place of academic prestige, was now a kill zone. Woo-jin's eyes locked onto the kidnapper, his expression shifting into a mask of deadly calculation. The devil of Seoul had been provoked, and the air around him seemed to freeze as he prepared to unleash a masterclass in terror. Sung-ho had grabbed the wrong girl, and as Woo Jin reached into his jacket, the kidnapper realized his payday had just become his death warrant. Woo Jin didn't wait for the kidnapper to breathe. As Sung-ho scrambled backward through the glass shards, realizing the businessman was a wolf in silk, Woo Jin reached into his pocket. He didn't pull a weapon, he pulled a phone. With a single swipe, he activated the Total War Protocol, a digital death sentence known only as 0 hour. "Lock it down," he whispered into the receiver, his voice a low, melodic threat that made the air in the hallway feel thin. Across the city, the heartbeat of Seoul stuttered. In a subterranean command center beneath a nameless skyscraper, the Night Watch, Woo Jin's private army of elite analysts and enforcers, moved with the synchronized lethality of a hive mind. Within seconds, the city's digital infrastructure belonged to him. Every CCTV camera from the neon-lit alleys of Gangnam to the sprawling bridges of the Han River flickered and turned, their glass eyes recalibrating to search for a single, hooded target. The school's perimeter was the first to fall. Black SUVs, appearing like ink blots on a page, glided into every exit of the Chingay Academy. Men in tailored suits and tactical earpieces stepped out, not to call the police, but to replace them. To the outside world, it looked like a VIP security detail. To the criminal underworld, it was the sound of a coffin closing. Woo Jin felt the vibration in his hand, a signal that the city was now his panopticon. He looked down at Soo-min, who was still trembling against his side. She looked at the phone, then at the cold, mechanical precision of the men now flooding the hallway, and finally up at him. For the first time, she didn't see her benefactor. She saw the devil of Seoul reflected in the dark lenses of his eyes. The city had become a cage, and Park Sung-ho was the only rat left inside. Woo Jin's thumb traced the edge of his phone as a map of Seoul glowed red with tracking data. The masterclass in terror had officially begun, and by sunrise, there wouldn't be a corner of the city that hadn't felt the weight of his retribution. The transition from the school's marble floors to the rusted, oil-slicked concrete of a basement garage took less than 20 minutes. The man tied to the wooden chair, a mid-level security consultant named Han, was already sobbing. He had sold the academy's backdoor codes for a gambling stake, thinking it was a victimless crime. He didn't know he had sold a map to the devil's heart. Woo Jin stepped into the dim light, the sharp silhouette of his black suit cutting through the humid air. He didn't look like a man in a rush. He looked like a man with an infinite capacity for cruelty. He placed his phone on a nearby workbench, the screen still glowing with the live feed of Seoul's lockdown streets. "The codes, Han," Woo Jin said, his voice terrifyingly soft. "It wasn't a question. I didn't know who she was. They just said she was a scholarship kid," Han shrieked, his voice bouncing off the damp walls. "I just needed the money." Woo Jin didn't respond with words. He reached onto the workbench and picked up a heavy steel industrial stapler. The sound of the spring loading was the only noise in the room. He walked behind Han, leaning down to whisper in the man's ear. "Every second my daughter spends in fear, I will take a year of your peace. But right now, I'm only interested in the next 5 minutes." The first staple didn't go into Han's skin. It went into the desk right in front of his eyes, a violent thud that signaled the end of diplomacy. Woo Jin's hand moved with surgical precision, grabbing Han's chin and forcing him to look at the photo of the shattered glass at the academy. "The man in the hoodie, where did he take her?" When Han hesitated, Woo Jin didn't hesitate back. He didn't use pliers or blades. He used the cold, crushing weight of his reputation. He leaned in closer, his eyes protective yet deadly, and began to describe, in vivid detail, exactly what the Night Watch did to people who wasted his time. The interrogation wasn't a search for truth, it was a dismantling of a soul. 5 minutes later, Han was screaming a name and a warehouse coordinate in the Incheon docks. Woo Jin stood up, wiped a microscopic speck of dust from his sleeve, and turned to his lead enforcer. "He's the first domino, knock the rest down. I want the warehouse leveled by midnight." As he walked back to the SUV, the retribution wasn't just a promise anymore. It was a localized storm, and it was moving toward the coast. The warehouse at the edge of the Incheon docks smelled of salt and stale gasoline, But inside the cramped office where she was held, the air was thick with Park Sung-ho's mounting panic. He paced the floor, his hoodie damp with sweat, clutching a burner phone that refused to ring. He had expected a weeping girl, a bargaining chip he could break with a few harsh words. Instead, he found himself staring into a pair of eyes that felt like mirrors of the man who had stood before the shattered glass. Sumin sat on a rusted folding chair, her school uniform wrinkled but her posture impossibly straight. She didn't sob. She didn't beg. Her face was a mask of iron blood, a chilling stillness she had inherited from a father she was only just beginning to truly see. "You should stop packing," she said, her voice steady and unnervingly quiet. "The sound is irritating." Sung-ho spun around, his aggressive posture faltering. "Shut up. You don't know the trouble you've caused. Do you have any idea who is looking for you?" "I do," Sumin replied, looking directly at him, "but you don't." She watched the way his hands shook as he tried to light a cigarette. The desperate gambler was unraveling, realizing that the scholarship kid was not a victim, but a trap. "You think you kidnapped a girl for money, but you actually invited a monster into your life. My father doesn't pay ransoms, he erases debts." Sung-ho flinched, the aggressive flare in his eyes dying out as her words hit home. He looked at her wide-eyed, frightened expression from earlier and realized it had been replaced by something protective yet deadly. The shocked and vulnerable girl was gone, replaced by the daughter of the devil of soul. "He's coming," she continued, her gaze never wavering. "And every minute you keep me here, the retribution gets worse. I'm not crying because I'm not the one who's going to die tonight." The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of the rain on the corrugated roof. Sung-ho backed away, the burner phone slipping from his numb fingers. He had intended to break her, but looking at her frozen, regal composure, he realized he was already the one who had been broken. While Sumin held her ground in the docks, the rest of Seoul's underworld began to burn. Choi Woo-jin did not believe in surgical strikes when his daughter's life was the price. He believed in the path of cinders. The rival syndicate that had provided the intel and the burner phones to Sung-ho was located in a converted textile factory in the city's industrial heart. They thought they were safe behind reinforced steel and a small army of street soldiers. They were wrong. The night watch arrived not with a knock, but with the roar of heavy engines and the cold efficiency of a symphony of destruction. Woo-jin's men dismantled the perimeter in minutes, moving through the facility with surgical precision. There was no negotiation, no offer of surrender. Every enforcer who raised a hand was silenced before they could even shout a warning. Woo-jin stepped into the center of the rival gang's headquarters as the last of their leadership was forced to their knees. He didn't look at them with anger, he looked at them with a terrifying, vacant indifference. To him, they weren't enemies, they were obstacles that had been cleared. He took a slow, deliberate drag from a cigarette, the ember glowing like a dying star in the dark room. "You gave a desperate man the keys to my house," Woo-jin said, his voice a low, melodic threat. "Now I will take the house you built." He didn't wait for their pleas. He dropped the lit cigarette onto a trail of accelerant his men had poured across the floor. As he turned his back and walked toward his idling SUV, the factory exploded into a towering pillar of orange and red. The philanthropist was gone, replaced entirely by a man who would burn the world down to keep his secret safe. The message was sent: no one survives the touch of the devil's daughter. As the headquarters collapsed into ash behind him, Woo-jin checked his watch. The 24-hour total war was nearing its climax. The path of cinders was leading straight to the Incheon docks. The rain at the Incheon docks didn't fall, it drove sideways, turning the world into a blurred landscape of steel shipping containers and grey sea. When the lead black SUV skidded to a halt, the warehouse doors erupted with muzzle flashes. Park Sung-ho's remaining hired muscle, terrified and cornered, opened fire in a frantic, undisciplined rhythm. Choi Woo-jin stepped out of the vehicle and into the hail of gunfire as if the lead was nothing more than a light mist. He didn't crouch or run. He walked with a steady, haunting composure, a ghost in a bespoke suit. The night watch moved in a protective formation behind him, returning fire with suppressed, lethal accuracy, but Woo-jin remained the eye of the storm. He reached the heavy metal door of the office, his expression tense and furious, his eyes locked onto the goal with deadly intent. Every bullet that whistled past him seemed to only fuel the cold, operatic rhythm of his advance. He was no longer a businessman, he was a force of nature reclaiming his only reason to breathe. Inside, the sound of the metal door being kicked off its hinges was louder than the thunder outside. Wu Jin stood in the doorway, the backlighting from the flickering sirens outside making him a silhouette of pure retribution. He didn't look at the armed kidnappers. His eyes instantly found Su Min. Seeing her sitting upright, her iron blood keeping her steady even as the walls were peppered with bullet holes, a flicker of pride crossed his stony features. He stepped into the room, ignoring the gun pointed at his head by a trembling Sung Ho. The devil of soul had arrived, and the air in the room died. The heavy metal door of the office lay in ruins, and inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and iron. Park Sung-ho's finger white-knuckled the trigger, the barrel of his pistol vibrating against the side of Su Min's head as he used her as a human shield. "One more step and I swear she's gone," he shrieked, his voice cracking under the weight of Wu Jin's silent, predatory approach. "I want 5 billion won and a boat to Jeju. You're a businessman, chairman. This is just a transaction. Let's negotiate." Wu Jin didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. The tense and furious expression on his face smoothed out into something far more terrifying, absolute, hollow emptiness. He looked through Sung Ho as if the man were already a corpse. "You think we are in a boardroom?" Wu Jin's voice was a low, melodic threat that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. "You touched the only thing that kept me human. You didn't steal a girl, Sung Ho. You opened a cage." "I'll do it. I'll pull the trigger." Sung Ho's eyes were wild, darting between the door and the shadow moving toward him. "Then pull it," Wu Jin commanded, his eyes locked on the threat with a deadly, unwavering certainty. "Because the moment you do, I will ensure it takes you 3 days to die. I will dismantle everything you have ever loved while you watch from a chair just like that one. Your debt won't be paid in one, Sung Ho. It will be paid in bone." The psychological weight of the devil of soul was a physical force, crushing the kidnapper's resolve. Sung Ho's hand began to shake so violently that the gun slipped, the barrel dipping toward the floor for a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Wu Jin needed. With surgical precision, Wu Jin moved. He didn't use a gun, he used his bare hands to show the price of a touch. In a blur of black silk, he disarmed Sung Ho with a sickening, wet snap of bone. The retribution that followed was beyond brutal, a systematic dismantling of the man who had dared to terrify his daughter. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of spirit and body, proving that some lines, once crossed, leave no room for mercy. When the screaming finally stopped, Wu Jin stood over the crumpled, sobbing wreck of the kidnapper. He didn't look at the mess he had made. He turned his back on the monster he had become and reached out to Su Min. His hand was stained crimson, but his voice was a whisper of the ghost father she had known. "Don't look, Su Min," he said softly, shielding her eyes with his palm. "The nightmare is over." But as Su Min leaned into him, her school uniform pressed against his blood-spattered suit, they both knew the truth. The secret was dead, and the retribution had changed the world they lived in forever. A week later, the morning sun over Chingay Academy was bright, but the atmosphere on campus had shifted fundamentally. The sterile, high-pressure environment of the elite school was now punctuated by a sight that silenced the usual chatter of the wealthy students. Lining the curb in a perfect obsidian row was a fleet of black SUVs, their engines idling with a low, predatory hum. Su Min stepped out of the lead vehicle, her school uniform crisp and pristine, but her expression carried a new, quiet weight. She was no longer just the orphan on a scholarship or the secret daughter hidden in the shadows. As she walked toward the gates, the night watch, men in sharply tailored suits with deadly gazes formed a silent, moving perimeter around her. Choi Woo-jin stood by the open door of the SUV, his black suit catching the light, his eyes tracking every movement in the crowd with surgical precision. He had abandoned his double life as a shadow operator. The world now knew exactly who she belonged to, and the devil of soul had made it clear. To look at her was a privilege, but to touch her was a death sentence. The transformation was absolute. Woo Jin had moved from a ghost father to an overt, lethal guardian, trading the safety of anonymity for the security of absolute fear. As Sumin reached the entrance, she paused and looked back at her father. There was no longer a curiosity gap or a secret between them. There was only the cold reality of their new life. She adjusted her bag, gave a single, firm nod, and walked into the school. She wasn't a secret anymore. She was the most protected person in the world, the living heart of a criminal empire that had burned the world down just to keep her safe. The retribution was over, but the reign of the mafia boss's daughter had just begun. Thank you for staying until the end. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to life.